I thought going home for a few days would be the perfect escape, a break from the stress, the noise, and everything weighing on my mind. But I was wrong, because when my little brother caught me in the act, I never imagined my quiet vacation would spiral into something far more intense, far more complicated, and far crazier than I ever expected. I hadn't even planned on going home. I was set on staying in my apartment, enjoying the rare silence away from college chaos. But then Mom called. Her voice was warm, laced with that soft guilt only a mother can pull off. "It's been months since you visited. Your brother keeps asking about you." That part caught me off guard, Ryan asking about me. We weren't exactly distant, but time had turned us into quiet strangers. So, with a duffel bag thrown over my shoulder, I stepped back into the house I grew up in. The familiar scent hit me right away. Wood polish, Mom's subtle floral air freshener, and something that smelled faintly like warm bread. Everything looked the same, and yet, something felt different. "Look who finally decided to come back," Ryan said from the couch, eyes flicking up from his phone. He'd grown. Not just taller, though that was obvious, he carried himself differently now. His voice had dropped, deeper and steadier, like it held something new, something I couldn't quite place. He wasn't a kid anymore. Yeah, I muttered, dropping my bag by the stairs. "Thought I'd grace you all with my presence." Ryan snorted but didn't push. His eyes followed me as I moved, and there was something in his gaze, a quiet curiosity, an intensity one didn't remember. Maybe it was just the awkwardness of brothers who hadn't seen each other in a while. Or maybe I was overthinking it. Dinner was the same as always. Mom chatting about neighbors, Dad barely looking up from his plate, and Ryan tossing in his usual sarcastic comments. But I could feel his gaze, flickering toward me when he thought I wouldn't notice. And that feeling, this strange awareness, settled into my bones. It lingered even as I went upstairs to my old room. The room was exactly how I left it, just a thin layer of dust covering the shelves. It was surreal being back, surrounded by pieces of my past. Posters I never took down, books I never finished, a bed that somehow felt smaller than I remembered. A soft knock on the door pulled me out of my thoughts. "You staying long?" It was Ryan. I turned, leaning against the dresser. "Not sure. Maybe a week. Just needed a break." He stood in the doorway, arms crossed, unreadable expression on his face. "College that bad?" I shrugged. "Just loud. Sometimes you need to step back." He nodded, slowly, but he didn't look away. And in that moment, under his quiet stare, I realized how much he'd changed. The kid I left behind wasn't a kid anymore. There was something else. Something in the way he looked at me, less like a younger brother. More like, I didn't know what. The tension didn't hit all at once. Crept in slowly, day by day. It was in the way we brushed shoulders in the hallway, even when there was room. The way his eyes lingered, watchful, too aware. I started noticing things I shouldn't. The way his voice had changed. The quiet confidence in how he moved. I told myself not to think about it. But once the thought was there, I couldn't unthink it. One evening, it was just the two of us in the living room. Mom and Dad were out. The TV played some random show, but we weren't really watching. I could feel the space between us, filled with something heavy. Even silence felt loud. "Do you ever miss being home?" he asked out of nowhere. I looked at him, caught off guard. "Sometimes, but you get used to being on your own," he hummed, fingers tapping the armrest. "I bet you get up to a lot of things living alone." The words were innocent, but the way he said them made my stomach twist. I swallowed, forcing a smirk. "Yeah, sure. Wild parties, constant studying. Typical college stuff." Ryan chuckled, shaking his head. "That's not what I meant." My pulse skipped, just for a second. "Then what did you mean?" I asked. He tilted his head slightly, like he was deciding whether to say more. Then he just shrugged. "Nothing. Just wondering." I exhaled and turned back to the screen, but I could still feel his eyes on me, and my mind wouldn't let it go. But it didn't. Later that night, lying in my old bed, I couldn't sleep. Every little moment from the past few days replayed in my mind like a loop. The way he looked at me, the way his voice dropped when he spoke, how he hovered, like he was testing the waters, waiting for something. I turned onto my side, staring at the ceiling. Maybe it was all in my head. Maybe I was reading too much into it. But deep down, I knew I wasn't. And the worst part? I didn't mind. Days passed, but something felt different. Maybe it was just the natural adjustment of being back home. But the air between us had shifted. Ryan and I had always gotten along fine. But now we were spending more time together. Small, seemingly innocent moments that shouldn't have meant anything. But they did. At first, it was subtle. Sitting closer than we needed to on the couch. Brushing past each other in the hallway, even when there was plenty of space. I wasn't sure if I was imagining it, or if he was doing it on purpose. But every time our arms grazed, every time our knees touched under the table, I felt it, that jolt of awareness. I told myself it was nothing, just me being hyper-aware because I wasn't used to having him around. But then the comments started. "You're looking different these days," he said one afternoon. His voice was light, but his eyes stayed on mine. "Yeah? In what way?" I played it off, kept my tone casual. Ryan shrugged, the corners of his mouth twitching in something that wasn't quite a smile. "I don't know. Just different." He left it at that, but it stuck with me. Then came the looks. Stares that lasted a second too long. Just past the point of being casual. Sometimes I'd catch him watching me, his expression unreadable. And instead of looking away like anyone else would, he held it. Like he was waiting for me to say something. I didn't. I acted like I didn't notice. But at night, lying in bed, I did. I noticed everything. Every brush of skin. Every lingering glance. It was ridiculous. I was overanalyzing. At least I thought I was. And then one evening it happened. We were in the kitchen. The space between us felt smaller than it should have. He was reaching into the cabinet above the counter. I moved past him to grab a glass. In that split second, his hand brushed against my waist. Barely there. Barely intentional. But it lingered. Just a second too long. I stiffened, not out of fear. More like anticipation. He didn't move right away. His fingers curled slightly, like he was debating something. Then he finally pulled back. "Sorry," he muttered. But he didn't sound sorry at all. I didn't know what to say, so I said nothing. That night, I couldn't quiet my thoughts. I kept thinking about the way he looked at me, the way his voice changed when he spoke. I was the older one. I was supposed to be in control. But now, it felt like the power had shifted. Like he was the one pushing boundaries, testing me, waiting. And the worst part? I didn't hate it. Not even a little. Something in me cracked open. And just as I was about to drift off, lost in thought, my door creaked open. I turned my head, expecting Mom or Dad. But it was Ryan. He leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, a lazy smirk on his face. "You look tense." My stomach flipped. I swallowed. "What?" He tilted his head, stepping further into the room. Didn't bother closing the door. "You've been acting weird." "I haven't." I lied, forcing myself to sit up. He hummed, unconvinced. "I think you have." Silence stretched between us. The space between him and the doorway suddenly felt too open, too dangerous. He wasn't supposed to be here. Not like this. Not with that look on his face. And yet he was, and I didn't tell him to leave. He watched me for a moment longer. Then, without a word, he left again. The tension that had been simmering for days now had fully settled in, threading itself through every interaction, every glance, every word. It wasn't subtle anymore. It was real, undeniable, heavy. Even when I tried to ignore it, I could feel it pressing down on me. And Ryan, he wasn't backing off. If anything, he was getting bolder. It started with little things, standing too close behind me while I cooked, reaching past me for something and letting his fingers drag against my arm. The way he said my name, slow, deliberate, like he was tasting it. The smirks, the teasing comments, the way his eyes searched mine, like he was waiting for me to slip. to acknowledge it, to give it a name. And then, over dinner one night, Mom smiled and said the words that made my chest tighten. "We're going away for the weekend. Just a little getaway. It's been forever since we had some time to ourselves," she added, reaching for the mashed potatoes. Dad nodded, barely looking up from his phone. "You boys can handle a few days on your own, right?" "Of course," I said quickly, trying to keep my voice neutral. Across the table, Ryan didn't say a word. But his eyes were already saying everything. The table let out a soft creak as Ryan chuckled, low enough that only I caught it. When I looked up, he was watching me, something flickering in his eyes that I couldn't read. The house felt different after they left. Too quiet, too still, like the air itself had shifted. I tried to keep busy. TV, my phone, anything to keep my thoughts from drifting into places they shouldn't. But Ryan wasn't making it easy. "Enjoying the silence?" he asked that evening, dropping onto the couch beside me. I shrugged, eyes on the screen. "Yeah, feels weird though," he hummed, stretching his arms above his head. His shirt lifted slightly, exposing a sliver of skin. "Guess we'll have to find ways to entertain ourselves," he said casually. My grip on the remote tightened. I told myself not to react. But he wasn't subtle anymore. Later that night, I was in the kitchen grabbing a drink when I heard him behind me. Quiet footsteps on tile. "What are you doing?" I asked, not turning around. "Just watching," he replied, his voice too calm, too casual. I glanced over my shoulder. He was leaning against the counter, arms crossed, head tilted slightly like he was trying to read me. "What?" I asked. Ryan smirked. "Nothing. Just thinking." "About what?" He shrugged, but the way he stepped closer felt deliberate, like he was waiting for me to back up. I didn't. That was my first mistake. The second was not stopping him when he nudged me lightly with his shoulder, testing the waters. "You used to be fun," he muttered under his breath. That made me turn. "What's that supposed to mean?" Ryan grinned wider, and before I could react, he shoved me. Not hard, just enough to throw me off for a second. "What the hell?" I muttered, steadying myself. He laughed. "You're so serious now. You used to mess around." I rolled my eyes. "I'm not wrestling you, Ryan. Scared you'll lose?" I scoffed. "You wish." The challenge was clear in his eyes, just before he lunged. I barely had time to react before he tackled me, his arms around my torso, trying to knock me off balance. Instinct kicked in. I grabbed his arm, shoving back. It started as a game. That's all it was supposed to be, until we landed on the couch. My back hit the cushions. His weight followed, and suddenly he wasn't moving. Neither was I. His hands were still gripping my arms. Our legs tangled together in the awkward aftermath of the struggle. But the struggle had stopped. We were too close. I could feel his breath against my face, warm and steady. His chest rose and fell against mine. Too slow, too deliberate. His fingers flexed slightly around my wrists, not tight, but firm enough that I felt it. I should have laughed it off. Should have pushed him away and made a dumb joke about how I clearly won. But I didn't. I just lay there, staring up at him. And for the first time I saw it. Not just in his eyes, but in the way he didn't look away. He knew. He'd known for a while. And now, so did I. Then, after what felt like forever, he finally smirked. Let go. Rolled off me like nothing had happened. But something had. That moment replayed in my mind the rest of the night. Couldn't sleep. I lay there staring at the ceiling, trying to make sense of what had happened. It was just a stupid wrestling match. Just a joke. Except it wasn't. I couldn't stop thinking about it. The weight of him. The way his body had pressed into mine. The way he looked at me just before he pulled away. I wasn't supposed to be thinking about it. But I was. And later that night, alone in my room, the tension that had been building for days finally cracked. I don't know why I let myself give in, not really. Maybe I thought he was asleep. Maybe I thought the house was quiet enough to keep it private. But I didn't know he was awake. I didn't know he could hear me. My breathing deepened as my thoughts spiraled. Heat bloomed in my chest, spreading outward. My body tensed, aching for some release, anything to shake the pressure off before it swallowed me whole. I turned onto my stomach, burying my face in the pillow with a sharp exhale. It was fine. No one was awake. The house was mine for the night, or so I thought. Just as my body relaxed into the moment, I felt it, a shift in the air. My skin prickled. Presence. A feeling. Like I wasn't alone. I froze. The room was dark, but not pitch black. A sliver of light from the hallway cast a faint glow across the floor. And then, movement. A shadow. My breath caught. My heart thundered in my chest. Slowly, too afraid to move too fast, I turned my head toward the door. And there he was. Ryan. My stomach dropped. For a second, maybe two, we just stared at each other. No words. No sound. Just the heavy weight of realization crashing between us. My mind scrambled for something to say. An excuse, a distraction, anything. But I couldn't move. I couldn't speak. And the worst part? Neither could he. He wasn't leaving. He wasn't looking away. He didn't even seem surprised. His face was unreadable, but his hands were gripping the doorframe, like he was holding himself there. My pulse was a roar in my ears. I should have been embarrassed, ashamed. I should have broken the silence. But I didn't, and neither did he. Seconds stretched into something longer, something heavier, something that refused to go away. Then, what felt like a lifetime passed before Ryan tilted his head slightly, his voice cutting through the silence like glass breaking. I've heard you do this many times before. His words hit me like a jolt. I sucked in a breath, my body tensing, heart pounding so loudly I could barely hear anything else. He said it so casually, like it was nothing, like this wasn't something that should have sent me into a spiral. I swallowed hard, trying to find words, but nothing came. Ryan stepped forward slowly, too slowly, his expression calm, too calm. He was watching me carefully, like he was waiting, like he wanted to see what I'd do next. My voice cracked. I clenched my jaw, forcing myself upright. I don't know what you're talking about. Ryan's lips curved. Not a smirk, not quite, but close. Sure you don't. His tone wasn't teasing. It wasn't mocking. It was just steady, like he was stating a fact. I gripped the edge of the blanket until my knuckles went white. How long? I asked quieter than I meant to. He shrugged, leaning against the doorframe. A while. The words landed heavy in my chest. A while. I had been careless. Too comfortable in this house. Too sure I was alone. But I wasn't. I never had been. My whole body felt hot. But it wasn't embarrassment. It was something else. Something deeper. Something I didn't want to name. Ryan exhaled through his nose, still watching me, the silence dragging out again until, finally, he pushed off the doorframe. Well, he murmured, starting to turn away, but then he paused, looking back over his shoulder. His eyes locked onto mine. Something flickered behind them, something I couldn't read. Then, with a trace of amusement, he added, "Don't stop on my account." And just like that, he walked away. But he left the door open. His words hung in the air long after he was gone. I sat there, pulse racing, body rigid, the warmth in my stomach refusing to fade. I should have been relieved, but I wasn't. I didn't know what I felt, just that everything had changed. I sat there in the dark, heart still pounding, my mind a mess of thoughts I didn't want to face. Ryan's words echoed over and over. I've heard you do this many times before. He'd walked away after saying that, but the room still felt charged, like he hadn't left at all. My body felt too warm, too restless, like I'd been caught mid-fall. I ran a hand down my face, breathing out slowly. What the hell just happened? Had I misread everything? Had I really been that careless? No, this wasn't about being careless. This was something else. Ryan had known, not just tonight, for a while. And the way he said it, so calm, so unaffected. It was like he'd been waiting for me to figure it out. I swallowed hard. Before I could process it any further, the door creaked again. I froze. My breath caught. Ryan. He was back. He leaned against the frame, arms crossed, eyes dark, full of something unreadable. He didn't speak at first. He just stood there, watching me. The silence stretched between us like a tightrope. Every second dragged. My pulse was in my throat. "What are you?" "You didn't finish." His voice was low, even, measured. I went still. He stepped into the room. Slow, deliberate. His expression unreadable, but his eyes. They said something else. My voice stuck in my throat. I shifted on the bed, suddenly hyper-aware of everything. The crumpled sheets, the heat still lingering on my skin, the air between us that had turned heavy, charged. Ryan tilted his head. "I could help," he said softly. "If you wouldn't mind." I exhaled sharply, gripping the edge of the blanket. "What?" His lips twitched, but it wasn't a smirk this time. "You heard me." I swallowed. "Ryan, don't." He cut me off, voice quiet but firm. He took another step closer, the space between us shrinking. The room felt like it was holding its breath. "You think I haven't noticed?" His voice was gentler now, almost curious. "Noticed what?" I asked, though I already knew. "The way you react," he said. "The way you look away too fast. Like if you don't, something will give." Heat climbed up my neck. "You're imagining things," I muttered. Ryan let out a quiet laugh, dry, disbelieving. "Am I?" Another step. "I think you knew exactly what you were doing. This whole time." My jaw tightened. "Ryan, don't." His voice cut through the room again, sharp and low. "Stop pretending." The usual teasing in his tone was gone. No smirks, no sarcasm, just truth. I stood quickly, trying to move, trying to create space. But he stepped in my way. "You don't have to pretend," he said again. Quieter now. "Not with me." I stared at him. My pulse was thunder in my ears. This was it. The moment where everything either fell apart or changed for good. For a long time, neither of us said a word. The tension undeniable, unrelenting, real. Thick enough to suffocate. His eyes searched mine, looking for something, maybe permission, maybe acknowledgement, and for the first time I didn't look away. Ryan's breath hitched. "Just slightly, barely noticeable. See," he murmured. "You're not stopping me." I wanted to, I didn't, and in that split second we both understood something we hadn't dared to say out loud. The tension finally snapped. I didn't know who moved first. Maybe neither of us did. Maybe we were always standing too close, always teetering on the edge of something inevitable. The moment was heavy, electric, charged with everything we'd been avoiding for days, weeks, maybe even longer. The air between us felt like a live wire buzzing with unspoken words, emotions neither of us had dared to name. Ryan's breath was shallow, his chest rising and falling, just slightly faster than before. His eyes flickered over my face, searching, hesitating, waiting. I could feel it, the pull, the invisible force that had been there all along, growing stronger every time we lingered in the same space, every time a glance lasted too long, every time silence spoke louder than words. I should have stepped back. I should have laughed it off, said something to break the tension, to remind us both that this wasn't happening, that it was just our minds playing tricks on us. But I didn't, because it was happening. Ryan swallowed hard, his throat bobbing. "This is crazy," he muttered, barely above a whisper. "Yeah," I said, my voice just as quiet. "I know," and yet neither of us moved away. The distance between us was nearly gone now, a breath, a heartbeat, a single thought away from something we couldn't undo. His fingers twitched at his side like he wanted to reach for me, but wasn't sure if he should. The hesitation was written all over his face. But so was something else, something raw, something real. I felt my pulse in every part of my body. I could hear it pounding in my ears, in my fingertips, in my chest. The space between us was suffocating, intoxicating. I took a slow, steady breath, trying to ground myself, but all I could focus on was the warmth radiating from his skin, the sharpness of his gaze, the way his lips parted just slightly, like he was waiting for something, like he was daring me to make the next move. "I don't know what to do with this," he admitted finally, his voice rough, almost strained. Neither did I, but I knew one thing for sure: I didn't want to walk away. Ryan shifted his weight, and for the briefest moment his fingers brushed against mine. It was barely there, a whisper of contact, but it sent a jolt through me, like a spark hitting dry air, igniting something I hadn't realized was Flammable we did it. The world around us seemed to slow the walls of the room, closing in, making the moment feel even more suffocatingly intimate. His breathing deepened, mirroring mine, matching the rhythm neither of us had said on purpose. I wasn't sure how long. We stood there caught in the storm of everything we weren't saying, but I knew one thing for certain: neither of us was ready to walk away, not anymore. There was no shame, no disgust. The air between us felt heavier than ever, like we had stepped past an invisible threshold, and there was no turning back now. I should have felt conflicted, maybe I did, somewhere deep inside, but in that moment, caught in the weight of his stare, I didn't stop. I didn't mind. The seconds stretched thick with everything we weren't saying, everything that had been simmering between us for days, for weeks, maybe longer. Then a noise, a sharp, unexpected sound from downstairs. My stomach twisted as reality slammed back into me like a cold wave, or jerked slightly, his breathing still uneven, his body stiffening as the sound settled between us. For a split second, neither of us moved, both frozen in place, like the moment could still hold itself together if we didn't acknowledge the intrusion. Then another sound, the unmistakable creak of the front door opening. I sucked in a sharp breath. Mom and Dad were back. Ryan's eyes widened slightly, and in an instant the weight of what had just happened crashed down on both of us. Without a word we pulled apart, moving too fast, too suddenly, like two guilty criminals scrambling for cover. I barely had time to process before I heard Mom's voice drifting up the stairs. Boys were home early. Crap. I turned to Ryan, my heart still hammering. His face was unreadable, but I could see the tension in his jaw, the way his hands curled into fists at his sides, like he was still holding on to something from before. He exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair before muttering, "We have to act normal." Normal, right? Except nothing about this was normal anymore. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to breathe, forcing myself to push down the storm raging inside me. Footsteps echoed up the stairs, and before I could fully react, Ryan grabbed my wrist and yanked me down onto the bed beside him. "Ryan," I hissed under my breath, "just act like we were asleep." His whispered voice was urgent. I barely had time to react before he pulled the blanket over both of us, positioning himself in a way that made it look casual. But the heat between us, the weight of everything that had just happened, still clung to the air. Then the door creaked open. Mom peeked in, looking pleasantly surprised to see us both lying there on the bed. The hallway light spilled softly into the room, painting everything in a dim glow. "Oh," she whispered, a small smile tugging at her lips. "Look at that. You two must have been catching up." Dad appeared behind her, glanced in briefly, then shrugged. "Didn't expect them to be asleep already," he murmured. "Guess they still get along after all." Mom chuckled softly. "Let's not wake them." She reached for the door and gently closed it behind her. We didn't move, not until their footsteps faded down the hallway. Then finally I exhaled. Ryan shifted beside me, but he didn't get up. He didn't leave. And for a long time, neither of us said a word. Everything felt different now. Even the silence had changed. I turned my head slightly, catching the faint line of hallway light beneath the door. My mind was still spinning, trying to process what had almost happened, and what it meant. But more than anything, I couldn't ignore the fact that Ryan was still here, still beside me, still refusing to let the moment disappear. Finally, after what felt like forever, he spoke. "Let's talk about this tomorrow." And from that night on, everything shifted. It wasn't just the silence between us. It was how we moved around each other, how the weight of unspoken things seemed to hum in the air like a storm waiting to break. No words had to be spoken, because we both knew. The next morning, I woke to find Ryan still beside me. His body turned slightly in my direction, his breathing steady and slow. He hadn't left. For a few quiet seconds I just watched him, still tangled in everything the night had stirred up. It would have been easy to pretend nothing happened, to chalk it up to exhaustion or misplaced emotions. But the problem was, I didn't want to pretend. I turned onto my back, staring at the ceiling. My heart was strangely calm, even with the chaos still stirring inside me. Ryan stirred beside me, stretching a little before blinking his eyes open. The moment he saw I was awake, a small, knowing smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "You sleep okay?" he murmured, voice rough with sleep. I swallowed. Yeah. His gaze lingered, quiet, unreadable. Good, he said, before sitting up and running a hand through his hair. Guess we should get up before Mom starts asking questions. I nodded, but it felt like my body was moving on autopilot. My mind still caught between last night and whatever today was becoming. We got through breakfast without a word about it. But everything had changed. The way Ryan's eyes found mine across the table. The way our hands brushed when we reached for something. Neither of us pulling away fast enough. The way he smirked when no one was looking, like he was testing the waters, waiting for me to react. And the worst part? I didn't hate it. If anything, I was waiting too. That night, when the house fell quiet again, I lay in bed, my pulse thrumming. And then the door creaked. I didn't have to look. I already knew. Ryan didn't speak at first. He just leaned against the doorway, watching me like he had the night before. Then, finally, a soft smirk. I hope you don't mind if I listen again. A slow breath left my lips. This time, I didn't look away. And this time, I didn't mind at all. We didn't talk about it. No grand confessions. No dramatic moments. Just an unspoken understanding that hovered in the air, reshaping everything. Every glance. Every interaction. Every breath we took in the same space. Ryan didn't act different. Not in a way anyone else would notice. He was still himself, confident, casual, always a little teasing. But to me, everything had changed. I noticed how he moved around me. How he stood a little too close. How his hand would graze mine when we passed in the hall. Fingers brushing against my wrist, just long enough to mean something. I noticed how he looked at me, not just glancing, watching, studying, waiting. And most of all, I noticed how I wasn't pulling away. If anything, I was waiting too. The tension that had once been subtle was no longer hidden. It was there, undeniable, settling between us like a quiet storm. Even dinner felt different. Mom and Dad laughed, told stories, asked about my plans for when break ended. But across the table, I could feel Ryan watching me. Flickering glances, sharp and fleeting, like he was testing how far he could go before I broke. At night, I lay in bed feeling his presence even when he wasn't there. But sometimes he was. I'd hear his footsteps pause outside my door, long enough to know he was standing there. And I never called out, never asked what he was doing. I just let the silence stretch, thick with something unspoken, and then he'd walk away. But on some nights, the door would creak open. Ryan would lean there, arms crossed, expression unreadable. You're still awake, he'd say. A beat of silence. And then, it would happen again. No words, no explanations, just the quiet pull between us. And I know now, nothing will ever be the same again. No matter how much I try to act normal, I feel it. The shift, the tension, the unspoken thing living in the air between us. So let me ask you, if you were in my place, would you let your feelings control you? Let me know in the comments.